Welcome to the Presbyterian Church of Victoria Safe Church Basic Training. Thank you for attending this training as part of serving in your role in your church. It is an encouragement to be together, knowing we all serve the Lord in ministry in our denomination, and we very much appreciate you giving your time to come along today. A little about me. My name is Fiona and I'm the Safe Church Trainer for the Safe Church unit of the Presbyterian Church of Victoria. In my role, I help to deliver this training to ensure Safe Church PCV is implemented well across our denomination. I want to thank and acknowledge the work of the Safe Church representatives in our church who assist the Safe Church unit by facilitating this basic training in local churches. I'm going to take you through the material in your training booklet today to help you become familiar with Safe Church PCV. At one point in the training today, we will be breaking into smaller groups to work through a scenario together. We will do this simply by working with the people sitting near to us in small groups. So there's no need to move from where you are for that section of the training. The scenarios will be handed out to you at the right time by your Safe Church representative. If you have questions about any of the material, you can call the Safe Church unit during business hours and ask your question. The phone number is in your booklet. Alternatively, you can email the Safe Church unit at the email address in your booklet with any questions. We love to hear from people, and any questions or queries are welcome. During the training, I will talk about churches. When I use the word churches, I am not referring exclusively to the Presbyterian Church. Rather, I am referring to Christian churches in general, all denominations. It's good to remember this. A final item to mention: the subject matter of basic training in particular focuses on child protection, but also on abuse in general. So I will be talking about some unpleasant subjects, some difficult subjects, and some material may be unsettling to hear and uncomfortable to think about. There will be people here today for whom the subject of abuse is purely academic, and while it is not a pleasant subject to cover, they may not be adversely affected by doing so. However, I am aware that for some people, they may actually find this material quite distressing. Please make sure to take a break if you need to and return when you feel ready to. If you need some support, please make sure you know that you have options to reach out for support and help. Here are some options for you to consider. You could also begin by talking to one of your leaders or contact the Safe Church unit for recommendations of Christian counsellors if that would be helpful. It is important to acknowledge that the training covers difficult and upsetting material, but for the safety of the children and the vulnerable in our church, we need to discuss it and be trained in it. Let's begin now by turning to page 2. We start by asking, what is Safe Church? Safe Church is the PCV's commitment to abuse prevention in the church and the policy and process for responding to abuse in the church. You complete basic training once and once only. Thereafter, you complete refresher training each year by watching the brief refresher training presentation available at the Safe Church PCV YouTube channel each year. The purpose of the refresher training presentation is to remind you of the main takeaways from basic training and the relevant obligations which apply to those of us who serve in the PCV. The refresher training presentation is updated each year, so please make sure you take the time to watch this brief presentation every 12 months. Senior leaders are also required to complete advanced training. For information on who is required to complete this training, please refer to your booklet or visit the training page at the Safe Church PCV website. The advanced training dates are also found on the training page at the Safe Church PCV website. In this training today, we will focus particularly on sections 1 and 2. Please make sure that you take the time, however, to read the entire booklet and to ensure that you have read sections 3 and 4 so that you have a thorough understanding of all the material in the training for your ministry and serving in your church. The purpose of basic training is to build a picture of what it is to practice safe ministry in the Presbyterian Church of Victoria. And this is what we will do as we work together through this material today. So let's begin. Please turn with me now to section 1. Here you will see what this section covers. Remember, you can always refer back to this material at a later date to refresh your memory as needed. Remember that in basic training, we are going to build a picture that represents the elements of being a safe church. Let's start now by asking, why do we need safe church? Before we go any further, we need to lay the foundation for the basic training. We train from the basis of the Bible. The Scripture is the foundation from which we build safe church. We begin by thinking this through with the following quote.
The Bible shows us that we live in a moral universe because it is created by the Holy God. Therefore, our actions matter. They have consequences and affect relationships. The doctrine of the Trinity tells us that relationship and personal relationships are not incidental to reality, but at the heart of reality. Forgiveness and Reconciliation, Study Paper, John McLean, 2003.
Let's now take the time to individually respond to the first reflection question there in your booklet.
Please pause here until ready to resume.
Now, let's read through the following scriptures together.
We know from the Bible that, as human beings, we are made in the image of God. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Genesis chapter 1, verse 27. God has a special concern for the vulnerable, especially children. Jesus said, "Let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these." Matthew chapter 19, verse 14. Jesus commands us to express our love for God in how we treat others. Jesus answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbour as yourself." Luke chapter 10, verse 27. Jesus treats our actions towards others, particularly those under our leadership and care, with the utmost gravity. Jesus said to his disciples, "Things that cause people to stumble are bound to come, but woe to anyone through whom they come. It would be better for them to be thrown into the sea with a millstone tied around their neck than to cause one of these little ones to stumble. So watch yourselves." Luke chapter 17, verses 1 to 3a.
So, let's start building the picture of the elements of being a safe church by acknowledging that everything we do in our roles in the church must be grounded in Scripture, and it is no different with Safe Church PCV. Hence, the Scriptures are the foundation of a safe church. You will see a section next called Getting the Balance Right. When we talk about getting the balance right, we need to remember often what we think about abuse, whether adult or child abuse, and the measures we put in place to prevent it, is coloured by our own experience. Sometimes our attitudes have been affected by what we learn through the media and popular culture. Our attitudes can also be affected by our cultural background and heritage. We have formed opinions through listening to podcasts, reading books, or watching TV or movies. It was not uncommon historically for Christian denominations to underplay, ignore, or even cover up abuse within the church. Tragically, where this sort of approach prevailed, many people experienced great suffering and harm. Further, the witness of the church to the love and saving grace of Jesus Christ was seriously damaged. As a result, the trust that had previously been expressed by wider society in Christian churches and institutions has been seriously eroded and undermined. In the past, sexual abuse was generally not spoken about. It was hidden. If it came out that sexual abuse was happening in an organisation, it was hushed up, the offender moved on, and the victim or victims encouraged not to speak of it. Thankfully, those days are gone. Change has come to the church from both within and without. If anything now, because of the widely known historical abuse in churches, Christian leaders are under greater scrutiny than ever in this area. Moving forward, we now seek to take a balanced approach to the prevention of and response to abuse within the church, whether in regards to adults or children. Thinking now about the spectrum shown on this page in your booklet, we will take a moment to complete the reflection question here about where we might personally sit on that spectrum.
Please pause here until ready to resume.
Now we will turn to the next element of building a safe church, the walls or boundaries, which are the Safe Church Policy and the Safe Church Code of Conduct. You must read through the policy and code of conduct. We will have time now in this section to read through the Safe Church Policy and the Code of Conduct. If you need more time to read these documents, please read them again in your own time. Please make sure you take the time to do so. The Safe Church Policy is public. It shows we will be held accountable for our actions as people place a great deal of trust in us, and we want to make our churches safe from abuse. Please pause the presentation here to allow everyone in this training session time to read the policy quietly to themselves. The Code of Conduct applies to anyone who is in a serving role, either as a paid employee or a volunteer within the church. A question you might have upon reading the Code of Conduct is, what is reportable conduct? Basically, this is any conduct in the code that is specifically banned or ruled out. It also includes conduct which must be reported under the Victorian Reportable Conduct Scheme. Information about this scheme is found at Appendix A in your booklet. Please make sure you read Appendix A so you know how to identify reportable conduct and make a report as described and as obligated by the General Assembly of Victoria and the Child Safety Laws of Victoria. Please pause the presentation here to allow everyone in this training session time to read the Code of Conduct quietly to themselves. The key takeaway here is to remember that each of us who serve in the Presbyterian Church of Victoria must adhere to both the Safe Church Policy and the Code of Conduct. The Safe Church Policy and Code of Conduct then provide the solid walls of building a safe church, and we operate inside these walls. So, to sum up Section 1, implementing Safe Church well by adhering to the policy and code of conduct and acting to prevent abuse is something that furthers gospel ministry. Nothing harms the witness of the gospel like abuse. Nothing harms a ministry more than abuse which takes place within it. We must take safe ministry seriously to effectively take the gospel to the world. Basic training helps you understand your responsibility as you serve in the church and helps you know what to do in a situation that is related to abuse prevention and response. The General Assembly of Victoria govern the Safe Church Unit via the Safe Church Committee. The Safe Church Unit is tasked by the General Assembly of Victoria with abuse prevention and response in the church. The Safe Church Unit is here to help you. We love to hear from people. We love to help the church live out safe ministry and provide gospel-centred witness to Christ's love and integrity and how each of us serve and minister in our church. The Safe Church Unit is a resource for you. Anyone can contact the Safe Church Unit regarding a Safe Church question or issue. The Safe Church Unit is also the place to contact regarding a report or a concern you may have that a report might be needed. The email and contact details for the Safe Church Unit are on page 1 of your booklet and also available at the Safe Church PCV website. Never be hesitant to seek help or voice concerns. It is better to speak up earlier rather than later. It's better to voice a concern and discover things aren't as bad as you fear, or to intervene earlier than later, as leaving an abuse situation alone generally only worsens the risk of harm to children and the vulnerable. So, please know you are always welcome to contact the Safe Church Unit with a request for help and guidance in safe ministry practice, or with any safe church concern, or to make a report. To sum up section 1 then, Safe Church PCV is dedicated to abuse prevention and response in the church. The Safe Church policy and code of conduct apply to all of you who work with children or who are leaders in the Presbyterian Church of Victoria. The Safe Church Unit is here to help you. This completes section 1 of the training. Now we will begin section 2. Remember, if you have any questions, please call or email the Safe Church Unit using the contact details on page 1 of your training booklet. Before I begin this section, I want to briefly bring to your attention the section highlighted here in italics and just mention again that we are going to be discussing material which might be distressing for some people. If you are feeling distressed, remember you can speak to a senior leader about this or contact the Safe Church Unit for further assistance. Hearing about abuse is upsetting. Learning about the topic of abuse is not easy, but remember we are doing so to help prevent abuse in our ministries and be able to help those people we meet who may be suffering abuse, and that is the most important thing. As we cover the nature of abuse, some of you might find that some of this material seems very obvious to you, or you may find you already know much of it. That's fine. It's always helpful to refresh your memory. Let's start by talking about abuse in a general sense. Let's begin with the introduction in section 2.
Understanding abuse. Abuse is a complex issue that seriously impacts a person's well-being. Abuse often occurs in environments where trust is involved, where a person in position of trust and/or authority misuses their position to harm another. Often the recipient of the abuse is vulnerable in some way, whether due to their personal circumstances, for example, their age or gender, or because in the relationship the abuser is in a position of power or authority. Abuse means to treat someone with cruelty or violence, especially regularly or repeatedly. It also means to misuse something, for example sex, to bad effect or for a bad purpose. For example, sexuality expressed between a man and a woman in marriage is a right and godly thing, while sexuality expressed between an adult and a child is a wrong and ungodly thing. In effect, it means to cause harm. Abuse can occur in any of the following forms: physical, sexual, emotional, mental, and, mainly in the case of adults, financial. Abuse in the church is a serious concern, and it is the responsibility of leaders and all those who work with children who are by their age particularly vulnerable to do everything possible to prevent and/or minimise the risk of abuse.
Reporting child abuse. The PCV is required at law in Victoria to train all employees and volunteers serving in ministry roles in our churches in child abuse detection, prevention and response. Hence our focus today being weighted to some degree towards children. The most important thing you need to know is that as a person in religious ministry in Victoria, you are a mandatory reporter of child abuse. Mandatory reporting refers to the legal requirement for nominated groups to report a reasonable belief of physical or sexual child abuse to authorities. Victorian law makes it mandatory for ministers and other appointed religious leaders to report child abuse, including when it is revealed to them during a confession or disclosure. For example, someone could make a disclosure that they abused a child in the past to you during the course of your ministry. Under the law, ministers and people in religious ministry face up to 3 years jail if they don't report child physical and sexual abuse allegations. The PCV already reports child abuse. Failure to disclose in the Crimes Act also means that each person who is aged over 18 in Victoria must report child sexual abuse. The existing Safe Church PCV reporting protocols, as contained within the Safe Church policy and Code of Conduct, mean that PCV personnel essentially operate as mandatory reporters already. Liberty to report. Any person in the PCV has the liberty to report directly to external agencies and the Safe Church unit any allegations or matters of concern of risk of sexual abuse or harm, noting that the purpose of reporting to the Safe Church unit is to ensure that the church can take action promptly to protect children. If a report is made first by a PCV volunteer or employee to the external authorities, a second follow-up report must be then made to the Safe Church unit by phone. This is to ensure that the PCV has fulfilled our obligations under the law to protect children in the church and to support the local church in ministry in the situation. Any questions you may have about this may be directed to the Safe Church unit. In summary, under Victorian law, all employees and volunteers of the Presbyterian Church of Victoria are mandatory reporters of child physical and sexual abuse. The Presbyterian Church of Victoria has zero tolerance for child abuse. The Safe Church unit reports child abuse to the relevant external authorities as per the law of Victoria. Moving forward now, we will look at how to recognise the signs of child abuse. The chart in your booklet shows possible indicators of child abuse. Let's take a moment now to silently read through this chart.
Please pause here until ready to resume.
Thank you for taking the time to read through this material. I suggest that you read through this chart again in your own time to familiarise yourself with the content. I hope you never have a situation where you have concerns of a child being abused. However, if you do, knowing this information will help you. As we minister to children, both from churched and non-churched families, we may see these kinds of signs in a child at some stage. We can't assume someone else will know this, hence we must be familiar with this ourselves. You will notice that there are different kinds of abuse, so make sure you familiarise yourself with the different types so you are switched on to what certain behaviours might indicate. There are many myths about child sexual abuse offenders. For example, that strangers pose the greatest risk to children from sexual abuse, which the offending data does not support. Hence, it is important to have some basic understanding about child sexual abuse offenders in order to be able to protect and safeguard children from sexual abuse in the church. In the vast majority of child sexual abuse cases, the victim knows the offender. They may be related to the victim in some way or associated with the victim's family in some way. The offender is usually male. This has been confirmed by every major study. Offenders are usually heterosexual. The majority of adult sex offenders report beginning their offence patterns in adolescence. The sexual abuse will usually continue until someone stops it. Reoffending rates for sex offenders are high. Offenders practice deceit and are very adept at disguising their actions. Offenders work actively to keep the abuse secret. Child sexual abusers prey on children or young people and the people around them. They actively manipulate those who care for the child or young person to make them more vulnerable. Offenders manipulate the system and can make themselves appear to be very respectable. Some offenders work to undermine the child or young person's reputation so the child will not be believed. Offenders recruit vulnerable children or young people and use grooming behaviours and coercion to prepare children and young people for abuse. This information about offenders is important because it reminds us that just because we might think a person is unlikely or incapable of abuse, offenders are cunning and manipulative, and we have to be mindful of this. Sadly, a common story in church child abuse cases is that when the victim spoke up about the abuse, they were not believed, and people said, "I know him, he's a godly Christian man, he would never do that." So remember, boys and girls of any age can be sexually abused. Children and young people must never be assumed to be lying about a claim of sexual abuse. Knowing about sexual abuse helps keep children and young people safe and protects them from it. When adults talk openly about sexual abuse, tell children what to do if they are threatened, and give children permission to tell someone who can help, then offenders lose some of their power over the child. It is not up to us to judge the veracity of any allegations or concerns. Our role is merely to be educated, aware, and ready to report in line with our legal responsibility as people in religious ministry, and then let the external authorities deal with all allegations and reports. Our other key role is to make safeguarding decisions and implement safe ministry checks and practices in order to do all we can to make the PCV a truly safe church for the little ones. Let's move along now to what to do if a child discloses abuse to you. You will see here a process, the abuse disclosure process, to follow. Make sure you always follow the process and finish by contacting the Safe Church unit to report. Do not deviate from the process or try to take matters into your own hands. Do not try to launch your own investigation into the situation or get over-involved. This is not your role. When a child discloses, your role is to listen, support, document what you have been told, and then report to the Safe Church unit. In most situations, you will have a senior leader you need to find after the disclosure and let them know what has happened, and then both of you can sit together and call the Safe Church unit. You must make sure that the Safe Church unit is contacted to ensure that the necessary mandatory report is made. The PCV, in line with the Safe Church policy and code of conduct and the mandatory reporting laws, will always report child abuse. The abuse disclosure process is summed up as: listen, support, document, report. Let's think a bit now about something that might happen when a child discloses abuse, and that is they tell you, "Please don't tell anyone about this." It is normal and understandable for a child to say you can't tell anyone else. Most likely the child's biggest fear is that you will tell the adult who is the alleged abuser. You can reassure the child that you won't tell that adult what has been said. Don't panic if this happens. Rather, remember some of the phrases shown here in your booklet to help you. Reassure the child that you are there for them and they did the right thing in telling you. Tell the child you will only tell who you have to tell so the child can be helped. You don't have to go into too much detail about this, but if the child asks who will know, tell them there is someone in the church who helps in this kind of situation, and you will tell them. However, if the child does not ask you if you will tell anyone else, there is no need for you to tell the child what your next action will be. When and how to report. Knowing when to report concerns about a child's safety from abuse is important. Some one-off signs are clearly reportable straight away. For example, a child disclosing abuse to you must be reported as soon as possible. A child telling you that another child they know is being abused must be reported as soon as possible. It is essential that we listen to children and act straight away to report when a child speaks up to us in such a way. Another clear one-off sign that a report is necessary is a child who displays age-inappropriate knowledge of sex or sexual behaviours and sexualised speech. For example, if you saw a child simulating a sex act with toys or other children as part of play. You need to ask what the context of the child is in relation to the behaviours or signs you are seeing. For example, habit disorders such as rocking or biting may be present in a child due to a disability or a medical condition. Speech disorders can also be present in children for various reasons and are unlikely alone in themselves to be a sign of abuse. So always ask yourself, what is the context of the child and what other information do you have about the child? If, however, you observe a marked change in a child's demeanour or behaviour and you know of no other context reason for this, or you have concerns which you are wondering what to do with, then it is important to contact the Safe Church unit to discuss your concerns confidentially in case a report does need to be made. It is also important to realise, however, that you may not have a situation where it is immediately clear that you need to report. What if you see only one thing that worries you? Or a child says only one thing that worries you? Should you report that one thing? Here is how we think about these sort of signs and indicators of child abuse. We look for patterns emerging over time. If you see one indicator in a child, that is just one indicator. If you see a second, then we have two indicators that have happened. That might just be a coincidence, but you would certainly want to be then aware and mindful that you may see more. If you see a third indicator, you now have a pattern emerging, and it's definitely time to make a call and report your concerns. You may find that it takes time to build up an overall picture of a child who is potentially being abused, as the signs of abuse may be infrequent at first. But as you get to know the child better through the course of your ministry, you may see more and more signs that lead you to have real concerns. While some behaviour on its own or a one-off incident or event may not indicate abuse is occurring, a pattern of such behaviours emerging over time clearly indicates that your concerns should be reported. It is better to report concerns to the Safe Church unit and discuss the situation confidentially rather than leave things be. It may be that your concerns are unfounded or explainable and no further action is necessary. However, the risk of leaving things too long is high when a child's safety and well-being is at stake. There may be a situation where you witness behaviour by an adult to a child that is clearly abusive, or where a child discloses information to you and you reasonably believe they are in immediate danger. In this instance, always report, and if necessary, call the police on 000 to intervene in a potentially dangerous situation. It is always sensible to involve another leader from your church or ministry group in discussing the situation and reporting. Churches and organisations may have protocols around this. For example, in youth ministry, a junior leader who has concerns about a child would need to discuss this with the senior leader, and then the report to the Safe Church unit will be made. Remember, however, not to discuss the situation any more widely and to maintain confidentiality appropriately. Always report any known or suspected child abuse to the Safe Church unit by phone. Personnel in the PCV are always able to make a report directly to Victoria Police or Child Protection First if you so wish. However, afterwards, the Safe Church unit must be notified of the case and the report made. Remember, it is always better to seek help and advice when a child's safety and welfare is at stake. You must read Appendix A for information on the Victorian Reportable Conduct Scheme and how to make a report under the scheme. Always report to the Safe Church unit. At this point, we now break into scenario work groups to work through a specific child safety scenario. Stay where you are and work with the people sitting next to you. You'll be given a scenario. You have 10 minutes to work through it with the group before meeting back together to discuss the scenario and the response.
Please pause here until ready to resume.
Thank you for taking the time to go through the scenario to ensure you are clear on the abuse disclosure process. We now turn to the behaviours used by offenders to prepare children for later sexual abuse. These behaviours are known as coercion or grooming. Grooming is a crime punishable by a jail sentence in Victoria. We need to recognise this and be aware of the gravity of this topic. Grooming behaviour is a pattern of behaviour aimed at engaging a child or an adult as a precursor to sexual abuse. Grooming is often characterised by creating a special relationship between the offender and their targeted victim, with the offender showing the victim special favours and gradually breaking boundaries with the victim. For example, by socialising the victim to touch, even sexual touch, and sexual talk. Grooming lures the victim and those around them into a false sense of security around the offender, allowing the offender to gradually exercise a high level of control over the victim and allowing secret sexual abuse by the offender to commence and continue. Offenders groom by taking small steps, small actions, saying a number of things that over time build up and ready a person for abuse. Grooming is a process over time that is always meant to result in the main goal for the offender, that is, the commencement of abuse. Grooming may also take place online or via phone texts or messages, and this is why there are clear boundaries in place within the Code of Conduct about grooming behaviour via electronic means, and why there are the Safe Church smartphone and online usage guidelines in place. You can find these in section 4 of your booklet and also on the resources page of the Safe Church PCV website. Please pause the presentation to allow time for silent reading of the information here in your booklet about grooming. Restart the presentation when you are ready to resume. If you suspect grooming is taking place, the key is to look for patterns of behaviour in both the suspected offender and the child involved. Think through carefully what things you have seen that are causing you disquiet. Ask yourself if the suspected offender has gone out of their way to gain your trust or subtly convince you that their behaviour towards the child is normal and unremarkable. Grooming is a breach of the law and the Safe Church Code of Conduct. If you have any concerns about grooming, Remember, it is better to speak up about these than leave the situation. A child's welfare is always paramount, and we must always act in the best interests of that child, even if it means that we feel uncomfortable raising concerns. The only way children are protected from sexual abuse or rescued from sexual abuse is when the adults around them act on their concerns and seek help and advice about these concerns. The aim is to protect children from abuse before it happens, and this can only occur when grooming behaviours are recognised and reported. Let's turn now to looking at other important Victorian child safety laws. In particular, we will look at the laws relating to criminal offences. A suite of criminal offences known as the betrayal of trust laws exist in Victoria. You have been given fact sheets along with your booklet today, which you need to read. As already discussed, grooming is a crime in Victoria and must be reported. In addition, a criminal offence exists in Victoria that imposes a clear legal duty upon all adults to report information about child sexual abuse to police or child protection. Any adult who forms a reasonable belief that a sexual offence has been committed by an adult against a child has an obligation to report that information to police or child protection. Failure to disclose the information to the authorities is a criminal offence. This criminal offence applies to all persons aged 18 and over in Victoria. Make sure you have read the failure to disclose fact sheet you have been given with your training booklet today. A failure to protect offence exists in Victoria for failing to protect a child from criminal sexual abuse. The offence applies where there is a substantial risk that a child under the care, supervision or authority of an organisation will become a victim of a sexual offence by an adult associated with that organisation. The person in a position of authority will be guilty if they knew of the risk of abuse and had the authority to reduce or remove the risk but negligently failed to do so. This offence is particularly relevant in the Presbyterian Church of Victoria for ministers and elders who are in governance and have both the authority and responsibility to protect children in the church. If you are an elder or minister on a session or a member of a presbytery or the General Assembly of Victoria, it is particularly essential that you have read the Failure to Protect fact sheet. In the case of any concerns relating to grooming, failure to disclose and failure to protect, make sure you report to the Safe Church unit. Remember, you can choose to report externally to the police or child protection first and then contact the Safe Church unit to ensure that the PCV meets our legal obligations and so that the local church is resourced appropriately to respond to the situation. However, if you're uncertain about reporting or simply wish to confidentially discuss your concern, to discern the next steps you might take, please call the Safe Church unit for support and guidance. The key takeaways for this section are here for you. We live out our faith and adhere to child safety law in the PCV in order to help the little ones come to faith in Jesus. This brings us to the end of the material relating to children, and we turn now to abuse situation involving adults. Make sure to read the information here about identifying and reporting abuse. Adult abuse situations could include financial abuse, where elderly people may be especially preyed upon or be vulnerable here. A leader sexually preying on a vulnerable adult under their pastoral care. An adult who discloses they were sexually abused as a child. An adult who discloses they are currently in an abusive relationship, for example with their spouse or fiancé. Sexual harassment. You will notice that the first part here talks about reporting crime. We just call this out in the training to remind ourselves that if we see or know of a crime taking place in a church scenario, we must report it. Again, anyone can call the police at any time without reference to the Safe Church unit, But after that call is made, you must please contact the Safe Church unit to report the situation so the PCV has an appropriate legal record. The situation you report may relate to an existing situation that is already known, and hence it is essential that this information be reported to the Safe Church unit. While this may seem an unlikely occurrence for you to become aware of criminal or abuse situations by and between adults in your church, it is important for us all to be mindful that we may indeed one day sadly find ourselves in such a situation, and we need to know how to get help and support. You will see information in your booklet about domestic and family violence, also known as intimate partner violence, in relationships where the parties do not live together, for example in a dating couple or an engaged couple. The presence of domestic and family abuse and oppression in a Christian marriage or relationship is abhorrent to God and completely against what God teaches us in His Word about Christ-centered, loving, godly and respectful relationships which demonstrate the fruit of the Spirit and are life-giving to those within them and around them. In addition, growing up in a family violence and abusive setting is deeply damaging to children, their welfare and their faith. Children are at risk of harm in such circumstances. The Presbyterian Church of Victoria is firmly opposed to all forms of domestic and family violence and abuse. Husbands are specifically told in the Scriptures, "Love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her," and are warned to love their wives and not be harsh with them, and to live with them in an understanding way. Therefore, any attempt to twist the biblical teaching to tacitly sanction domestic violence or abuse is a gross perversion of the Bible's teaching. Please make sure you have read through the information provided in this section to you, and always contact the Safe Church unit if you have any concerns about domestic violence, abuse and oppression in your church, especially where there are children under 18 in the family. These situations are complex and they require a dedicated response with professional advice to guide us. Contact the Safe Church unit to confidentially discuss your concerns. You are always welcome to call and seek advice and support. Finally, we look again at the process for how to respond to an adult who discloses abuse or makes an allegation of abuse. Remember, the main points are: listen, support, document, and call the Safe Church unit to report. Again, let's remind ourselves, our role in such a situation is just to listen. We don't add anything or press the person for details. We simply let them talk and offer support and pastoral care in our approach. Don't make a judgment about the situation. Document what you are told. Keep confidentiality and report. Here are the key takeaways for Section 2. Remember, the Safe Church unit is here to help you, and you are always welcome to contact the Safe Church unit for help and advice. We are here to support you in your gospel ministry. We now turn to Section 3. We will start by reminding ourselves that in basic training today, we are building a picture of being a safe church. We have our foundation, the Scriptures, and our walls, the Safe Church policy and code of conduct and legal compliance with government requirements so far. We now move from abuse response to abuse prevention, and we do this by focusing on wise leadership in Section 3 and wise practices in ministry in Section 4. The best way to prevent abuse in the church is for all those who serve in roles in the church to live out their Christian faith in their leadership and care for others. When people lead and serve according to the example of Jesus Christ, this allows for safe ministry and gospel witness to be given throughout our church. Here again, we must turn to the Scriptures for wisdom and teaching about what it means to exercise wise leadership according to the Lord.
Power, authority, and responsibility. After washing his disciples' feet, Jesus said, You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. John chapter 13, verses 13 to 17. In Matthew chapter 20, verses 25 to 28, Jesus said, You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many.
We will pause now to take the time to consider these scriptures and answer the reflection questions here.
Please pause here until ready to resume.
Whenever we serve and lead in the context of our ministry, we must remember that people place a great deal of trust in us, and we want to model Christ-like behaviour. One of the ways child abuse offenders have been able to access children in churches in the past in Australia was by being easily able to join ministries to children without any scrutiny or consideration for their suitability. Sadly, many victims of child abuse in Christian churches were abused and harmed by people who were placed in positions of authority, power and ministry to children, but who were unsuitable people to be so. The consequences have been tragic and lifelong for the victims and their families. This is why this training emphasises that the Presbyterian Church of Victoria expects that suitable people are chosen for such roles, and screening must be applied through the use of the Safe Church PCV volunteer approval process. But it's not just the church that expects this. This is a requirement for all organisations which work with children within Victoria under the Child Safe Standards. So, if you know someone who wishes to work with children in the church, they need to undergo the volunteer approval process. The Safe Church representatives in each church facilitate the process. So, speak to the Safe Church representative about this. Advise any person seeking to work with children in your church to contact your Safe Church representative for more information about this process, or visit the Safe Church PCV website. Look at the volunteers page. Children who have grown up in the church and who, upon turning 18, wish to work with children in the church must also complete this legal requirement by undergoing the volunteer approval process. Now let's turn to another central aspect of wise leadership and ministry, one that will be familiar and known to many people here today: boundaries.
Boundaries. In a culture which celebrates the absence of boundaries as individual freedom, it is sometimes difficult to recall the value of boundaries in our lives, and in particular, in our ministry or teaching. But without boundaries, we cannot really be in relationships. With boundaries, we develop trust in relationships and minimize the potential to cause harm. Boundaries are a gift that gives shape to our relationships. M. Fortune, Boundaries, 201, 2012, page 5.
The Safe Church Code of Conduct is the clearest expression of boundaries in ministry, and that is why it is important that you have read and are familiar with the Code of Conduct. Please ensure that you have read the information provided to you in this section of your booklet. Remember, it is not the responsibility of the people we minister to, whether they be children under 18 or adults, to maintain appropriate boundaries in ministry. It is our responsibility to maintain appropriate boundaries. Adults and children under 18 might act outside what we expect. They may initiate a breaking of appropriate boundaries, but it is our role to clearly reaffirm the boundaries. We do this with kindness, with Christ-like care, in such a way that we don't embarrass the person we're ministering to. We do it with transparency and with accountability to each other. If you have a situation where there has been a boundary overstep, whether accidental or intentional, always tell another leader about it. Seek advice and help. And remember that together in ministry we must keep each other accountable. Remember, it is not appropriate for a leader to form a romantic relationship with a person under their leadership. If you find yourself experiencing romantic feelings for someone under your leadership, you need to speak to a senior leader about this for support and advice, or confidentially call the Safe Church unit for support and advice. If you believe a person under your leadership has formed romantic feelings for you, it is also imperative that you seek help and guidance. Again, speak to a senior leader or call the Safe Church unit. Please make sure you read all of Section 3 in your own time. You are always welcome to contact the Safe Church unit for further assistance and support in inquiries about boundaries in ministry. The Safe Church unit welcomes such inquiries, and we love to provide resourcing and help to people in our church. So then, to sum up Section 3. Wise leadership means practicing boundaries. Wise leadership and practice means following the code of conduct. Wise leadership means seeking help and support for safe ministry when you need it. Section 4, Wise Practices. We continue focusing on abuse prevention with this final section. We are going to think about our ministry practices. Remember, our aim is to minimise or remove the risk of abuse occurring in our church by how we practice our ministry. Again, our foundation is in the Scriptures.
And whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. Colossians chapter 3, verse 17. Jesus said, "Let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these." Luke chapter 18, verse 16.
You will also see here a useful thinking tool for how we plan and conduct our ministry in our roles and ministry activities and programs. The TAP principle is T, transparency. Whatever we do as leaders, we do in a transparent manner and we don't hide things. A, accountability. We recognise that we are accountable to God for how we minister. We practice accountability with each other and bring other leaders in when we need advice or help or need another set of eyes on a situation. Don't hesitate to seek the wise counsel of others or alert a senior leader to a situation you have concerns about. We work for the Lord in community, and there is real strength to be found in collaborating together and seeking support. P is for preparation. We think things through before we act. We do all we can to be prepared for situations that might arise, and we plan and prepare for them. This particularly applies to some of the practical things we do. Thinking about first aid, for example, or providing food. There are many safe ministry resources for you available at the resources page of the Safe Church PCV website. Your ministry leader will also have information for you about how safe ministry is conducted within your own ministry setting in your local church. Make sure you speak to your ministry leader to find out what practices are in place, and always ask questions if you are unsure or you need further guidance. It is far better to ask a question before you encounter a problem or dilemma, rather than go ahead when you're not clear about what is required. There is also information in your booklet about wise practices which are common to many ministries in the PCV. You will see the child protection general protocols in your booklet, and you must read through these, please. Key wise practices include: take care to make sure you are never alone with a single child during the course of your ministry where there is nobody else present and nobody else can see you. If a child wants to talk to you privately, you can do this in the same space as everyone else by going to a quiet corner away from the group. Or you could stand outside the ministry space, but where you can both be seen at all times during the discussion. Do not allow a child to sit on your lap. If a child climbs on your lap, make sure to keep both your hands visible to the group and ask the child to sit with the other children. If the child refuses to hop off your lap, then carefully lift the child off your lap, keeping your hands visible to the others at all times, and instruct the child to sit with the others. If a child or teen in your ministry approaches you for a hug, offer a high five or a fist bump instead. The aim is to always act with integrity in our ministry to children and in such a way as to prevent misunderstandings or even the perception of unsafe behaviours with children. Again, please read through this information in your own time and speak to your ministry leader to find out how these practices are implemented in your ministry setting in your church. Use of social media and online and smartphone communications in ministry requires wisdom, with a concentrated focus on transparency and accountability. You will find the online and smartphone usage guidelines reproduced for you in your booklet in section 4, along with the other wise practices for safe ministry information. These guidelines are also available at the resources page of the Safe Church PCV website. Make sure you have read through and implement these guidelines in your ministry. Speaking now of cultural and social diversity, this is mentioned specifically here just to remind ourselves that we need to be sensitive to the culture of others. This can be summed up in the phrase, "Don't assume everyone thinks and responds as you do." If you are ministering to a person of a different culture, take some time to find out about their cultural norms and look for ways you can be sensitive to this in your ministry approach. It is much better to apply the P of the TAP principle, namely preparation, than to be ill-prepared and make a mistake which damages the cause of the gospel and hurts another person. So, to sum up the key takeaways of section 4. Wise practices flow from following the code of conduct, applying the TAP principle and implementing safe ministry practices within our local church setting. Returning now to the picture we are building of a safe church today in the training. Together, our wise leadership and practices are the roof on the safe church. Let's now sum up our learning today. In the PCV, we are committed to harm-free, abuse-free gospel ministry, fellowship and witness. We live out our commitment by implementing and adhering to Safe Church PCV in the church. Now to complete our picture we are creating through basic training. Indeed, we finished the Safe Church basic training, therefore, where we began, with our focus on our loving God, for whom and in whose name we serve and minister. Remember, safe ministries are healthy, growing ministries. Safe ministries allow people to grow in their faith and go on to bless others. Safe ministries and safe churches are a Christ-like witness to the world. Thank you for attending basic training today, and thank you for your ministry in our church.